Welcome back to Tobago Thursdays on the Now Morning Show. Of course, we have been speaking of the oil spill in Tobago, the volunteer efforts and so much more. But now it's time to focus on the academic setback of the oil spill. Tobago Officer from TTUTA, Braden Roberts, joins us this morning to update us. Good morning, Braden.
Good morning, and good morning to the team, the viewers, and the listeners.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for taking time out this morning to discuss this topic because, as we were speaking very briefly off air, we haven't seen a lot of focus on this and we really need to get into it. Now, if I'm not mistaken, 2 schools would have gotten the all clear to reopen yesterday. Can you give us an update on that?
Right, so we would have had the first week after the oil spill where Scarborough Secondary School and Lambo Anglican Primary, they are in close proximity to where the initial spill was. They were asked to reopen the Wednesday of last week, and the PT raised their concerns and the students did not come out, which would have prompted TMA to come in and do further tests. They further recommended additional cleaning and stormwater division would have arranged and put in place. We have the concern now that the stench is still there, and we don't have any ideas when the stench would totally go away. What they would have done was to test the quality of the air to make sure that the air is not harmful. Based on the feedback I would have received, persons from TMA would have visited both schools and given advice to the teachers so that they will share with the students on the way forward in how they operate at school.
Definitely, of course, something for concern, the air quality and so much more. Let's talk about teachers, though, because with this just sudden closure out of nowhere, it must have been very challenging, not just, of course, for teachers being able to execute their function, but also for the children. How were the teachers able to cope with the closure during this time?
Well, it would have been a frustrating period where we also would have had parents. Of course, they are not so much informed as to how a switch could take place. So as soon as persons heard that the school was closed, they expected online engagement. And it's not that. And they have been pressuring the principal and the teachers. I've heard some persons calling on the division. Yes, the division need to get things to put in place, but it's not to just grab something from a hat that we already have. We don't have suitable spaces in Tobago right away that is readily available. So whenever a school has to shut down for whatever reason, that they get there. So the pressure coming down on the teachers to try and find these mechanisms to teach online and so on. We would have went through the pandemic and we had this topic of learning loss. We have this topic of learning loss because online engagement was not fulfilling. It would have sufficed because of emergency engagement, and it would have filled the gap while we waited until school reopened. So persons are banking on the online, but online requires a disciplined student. It requires a disciplined family where the parents are able to guide the students while they're at home. And we won't have that, especially when we have parents working 2 and 3 jobs. So it's not that we could just jump online, and persons been expecting a lot of teachers. Teachers themselves know that they have a curriculum to complete, and they would want students to successfully complete that curriculum. Would have been trying to find means as well, but the frustration from all angles coming down on the school, especially the principals, would have had to endure the interaction as the central person to deal with all the stakeholders.
It's so unfortunate to hear that. And this is why these conversations are necessary, because at the end of the day, it's not as though perhaps you'll snap your fingers or wave a magic wand and everything is prepared for something such as this. Unforeseen circumstances, definitely something that nobody expected, and also needing to take into consideration that teachers, principals as well, aside from having their duties to fulfill, could have been adversely affected in a personal way also. Now, the next question, of course, as we're speaking of children, is this space of time, has it been long enough to adversely affect their learning?
Well, every day lost at school is significant. What we need to have is an idea so what our program for each school is, and we don't. We have teachers in their classes doing their thing. So the standard 2 teacher may not really be in sync with what the standard 4 teacher need. So the standard 2 teacher teaches his or her curriculum and then send for the students. And for the secondary school, the math teacher is not in sync with what the social studies teacher is doing. So we do not have an idea as to how we can measure what the loss is. What we can gauge is how much teaching time was lost. We can gauge what content has not been able to be covered. But are we measuring the value of the content that was covered? Is it that students were able to cover what packages were sent home or what online work at a satisfactory level? We would have some high flyers who would give us the feeling as if, right, the whole class understands because they would answer up in class and give you that feeling that, yes, the lesson was well taught. But what about those who are a bit shy and not so forthcoming with their responses, who are being left behind? And we see what is happening with the crime and the school violence. Those students who are being left behind, we are coming to bear the fruit afterwards.
Hmm.
So to measure learning loss, I would have asked the secretary for a meeting because we need to really assess that term learning loss. What are we classifying learning loss? Is it time, content, or quality? And we have to be able to measure that.
No, definitely do have to be able to measure that. That should be something at the top of the list as this conversation continues. Because let's be frank about it, this is something that came out of this sudden oil spill, but it's not to say that something else may not happen that could have the same effect. So tell me something, Braden. Have you received perhaps any guidelines, any notice as to what is to be done in situations like this, or is this a case of your team coming together and just getting it done?
We have had meetings with the secretary, the administrator, the entire team, and we have discussed keeping the team together beyond this period to get those things put in place. As I said, it's not something that will be quick. Unfortunately, we have a society that wants a quick fix. So if something happens, we hope that something is done in a month or 2 months, if that is even short enough or long enough for us to get an answer in. We need to have programs for school, and I have been advocating for this for quite a while. We should not have the curriculum so segmented where if we had a project where if we have an agriculture base, at least there's a project because life is education.
Hmm.
So we need to create experiences. So if we don't know what experiences our students need, more than the math teacher knowing what math content he has to deliver and the agri teacher knowing what agri content he or she has to deliver, that segmented approach to delivering education would not allow you to bridge the gap when there is that need. So we have been submitting to the division, to the ministry. We need to have a holistic approach where the education is more integrated into the various subject areas so that we could utilize the resources of time, money, and even the textbooks and the content that we are utilizing to give a more meaningful experience. That is how I believe we can bridge the gap where this term of learning loss is. Subsequent to that, we would need to have buildings that we should be able to identify if we need to shift location, what we can put in place and so on, have those set in place so that we can have a speedy response to something like this.
Most definitely. Braden, would you be able to tell us roughly how many students have been displaced per this closure?
I believe Scarborough Secondary has above 800 students, close to 900 students, and Lambo, if I'm not mistaken, would have just above 100 students. What the division would have put in place and working with the principals is for the standard fives. They were at the TTUTA, that is the 211 building in the information building in Tobago up at Signal Hill. They had a room there where they were doing that face-to-face interaction with their standard five teacher, which we were grateful for. We were in the middle of planning for the exam students for Scarborough Secondary School in fifth form and sixth formers. However, we are grateful. We haven't been able to locate and have those spaces ready, but school has reopened and we are grateful for that. But we need to continue working on those spaces because Scarborough Secondary School has been suffering for some years with closures, and we need to have the alternatives in place.
And definitely, no doubt. I mean, this is not the first time, of course, you've been on the show, and we've had the conversation about Scarborough Secondary School and the ongoing concerns. Let's go across to that for a quick moment. Do you have any recommendations, or does your team have any recommendations when it comes to Scarborough Secondary School and just this ongoing conversation based on issues?
Well, we have submitted, TUTA submitted back in January last year when there was a meeting to discuss the new school. That we need to do an audit of Scarborough Secondary School. We need to know what the program offerings are, where the weak areas are, what the strengths are, so we'll know how we can strengthen the weak areas and further strengthen the strong areas and so on. We are too segmented. So if we don't have an audit of the school and a true assessment of the needs, we would always be reactive and won't have an opportunity to be proactive in treatment with any particular instance. The attention span to these things, unfortunately, is too short. We are in Tobago where various things are happening. So we may have the conversation now, and as something else pop up, we run to that. We need to have whether a particular committee sit down, and not just Carver Secondary School. We need to assess all our schools. We need to have a crisis management profile where, should this happen, what is the contingency? We are not doing that, and we have not been doing that for years more than. When something happened, we have this series of submissions from either the secretary, the minister, tutor, and it goes away when the problem is seemingly fixed. We need to have an idea of what our strengths and weaknesses of our schools are, SWOT analysis.
From this conversation this morning, a lot of submissions have been taking place, a lot of meetings, ongoing meetings as well. Now, we're focusing on the administrative side, of course, because this is essential to ensuring that our children are able to get that which, of course, they are entitled to, which is an education. But let's go back to the children for a second. I mean, of course, as a Tobago officer, you interact with many children. You see the ongoing issues and conversations. How do you think the children have been affected mentally by this, if at all? Have they displayed any signs? Have you gotten any feedback from teachers or counselors?
Well, outside of the oil spill, our students been displaying it with the school violence we're seeing in the media. Persons are coming from various communities with their particular challenges. So sometimes when they are locked down for a period of time and then they all converge into this one space, bringing all of their various experiences without the guidance and the counseling and the reintegration into school and so on, we're having the problem where the behavior is a challenge. Um, Students would need some time to settle back into school where they're having that instruction with the teacher in front of them. We try to get back to business as usual quickly and not really catering to the needs of those students, especially the ones who weren't doing anything at all at home. So there is need for in-depth analysis, and the meetings that you would have even mentioned, I believe they are too shallow. We discuss some of the main topics, but we don't go deep into them. So those students, especially who online learning don't cater to, those who don't have the devices, don't want reading any books at home, they don't have the parents at home to help them and guide them through the work. When they just come back out to school after 2, 3, 4 weeks out, and we just run back to the same speed of teaching, they are going to be left behind. So we need to have a reintegration, and we need to have the little counseling sessions in between time and not just on a morning period when we have assembly. It needs to be ongoing throughout these sessions each day.
We definitely do, and I couldn't agree with you more. Braden, before we wrap this conversation, do you have any closing comments, any recommendations that you would like to share moving forward?
Well, we have had a society where we blame it, and sometimes you see tutor blaming the division, and the parents blaming the teachers, and the teachers blaming the parents. We have to come together and work on these things, because we are all going to be living in Trinidad and Tobago with a society that would be difficult to live in. We all need to work together. So I'm calling on the teachers, continue to be strong. Parents, let us try to work together. The division, it's important to have the consultations where we all come in together with our contributions to come out with the solutions that would be more long lasting. So I want to give that hope where we can really work together and get education where it needs to be.
And definitely, I couldn't agree with you more. Braden, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and looking forward to having you back on the show as we continue the conversation with education in Tobago and, of course, throughout the Twin Island Republic, hoping that things are sorted out as soon as possible and those recommendations are heard loud and clear and we see a brighter future. Have a great day.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on set.